Hi, I'm Ash and this is a review of the North Sonar MA V2, and as a little bonus I'll also be including a few words about the North HA foils as well. For this review we have the CF85 carbon mast, the 700mm carbon fuselage, the MA 1050 V2 and the S270 tail. I was also fortunate enough to test the S208 and the S185 tail stabilisers as well. As this is a foil review, we will cover pumping onto foil, low speed, high speed, glide, pump, jumping, breaching, tip stall, surfing waves, chop handling and overall manoeuvrability. Before we get there, I want to briefly discuss the overall range. North foils are very competitively priced, and unlike many foil systems, the range is relatively easy to understand, with HA, MA and surf foils. HA being your gliding fast foils, MA being your mid-range freeride foils, and surf, well, I probably shouldn't need to explain that. The tail stabilisers also come in three forms: freeride stabs ending in 0 like the S270, speed stabs ending in an 8 like the S208, and surf stabs ending in 5 like the S185. Again, pretty easy to navigate. North also have an excellent foil guide that explains what tails match with what front wings and generally explains the range as a whole. It's all really very well thought out. Regarding their foil system, the carbon CF85 mast isn't the stiffest mast on the market, but it is still plenty stiff enough. But they do have an ultra high modulus mast if you require that. I found for the MA 1050 V2 and smaller foils I was using, the CF85 was perfectly good and I couldn't feel any unwanted flexing. The mast fits into the carbon 700 fuselage and is a tapered compression fit. It fits extremely snug with no movement at all. The front foil bolts to the fuselage with 3 M8 titanium bolts, and the tail stabiliser uses shorter M8 bolts. The fuselage bolts the mast again with M8 bolts, and the mast itself bolts the board with M8 bolts. All bolts provided are titanium, and it's nice to have a foil system where you only need one size of screwdriver. The mast doesn't have slots in its base for the bolts to the board, so you can't slide your bolts into your base like you can on some masts, so it's a little more tricky to fit with the systems using countersunk slots for the bolts. However, not having slots does actually make the fitment of the mast to the board stronger. Finish on all the parts is excellent, and the fitment is absolutely superb with nothing loose or wobbly. Quite the opposite, in fact. Everything fits together supremely well, and this is a really well thought out and executed system. The whole system with the CF85 mast, once bolted together, is surprisingly light. Very noticeably lighter than my usual axis setup with the Ultra HM carbon mast, which is really heavy in comparison. Now you might say, well, what if you fitted the North Ultra HM mast as well? And the answer to that is it's the same weight as the CF85 mast, and so it would still be considerably lighter than the axis setup. If you plan to use much bigger foils, and by much bigger foils I mean much larger span, larger area foils, then you may want to upgrade to the North high modulus mast. This will handle the torsional and bending loads far better than the standard CF85 mast. Overall, for first impressions and bolting it all together, very impressive quality, easy to put it all together with everything fitting perfectly, no complaints at all, and actually I'd say in my opinion it's got a better fit and finish than my more expensive axis foils. The only thing I'm not so keen on are paint schemes on foils, like the green stripes on this one for example. These just make repairs look terrible, as you can never recreate the same finish when the manufacturer uses complex paint schemes on their foils. I much prefer just a plain black carbon. Sailors who sail from reefs or from stony beaches will understand this point better than others. Let's move on to performance. The main foil on test here is the MA 1050 V2. The MA V2 is the newest foil in the range. I can say right away that this foil sails bigger than its 1050 area would have you believe. Low end is very good, and with my light wind board I was comfortably able to get this onto foil in 10 knots. I could also stay on foil in this wind and make jibes. Whilst we don't have the same low end as another new foil such as the DuoTone Whiz, my current champion for low end lift on a small foil, the MA 1050 V2 does deliver a very adequate low end, and you can be moving really quite slowly before it stalls and drops out. Additionally, when it does stall and drop out, it's a very soft stall, not a hard stall like you get on some high aspect foils. It is a foil that prefers to speed onto foil rather than be kicked onto foil, although it will tolerate being kicked onto foil, but you can get the occasional stall trying to do it this way. With this being a medium aspects foil with an AR of 6.9 and a wingspan of 850mm, you might expect that it perhaps isn't a fast foil. And here you'd be wrong, as this does have a very reasonable turn of speed. Not much different to the equivalent HA foils in the North range, which I'll come on to later. What is noticeable with this foil when you are up and foiling is that it is exceptionally forgiving. It's not pitch sensitive and it actively resists breaching. If you do force it to breach, it recovers so quickly that often you don't even touch down. You can also poke wingtips out without any fear of a dropout, and overall it's just a very benign and super easy forgiving foil to ride. The result of this is that it is an extremely confidence inspiring foil. It actively encourages you to try out new things, knowing that if you make a mistake it isn't going to punish you but instead gather things up for you and make you look good. It also handles chop exceptionally well, cutting through it and not bouncing you around or swerving left to right in the turbulent lift. This is a major plus point for this foil. The usability level is just supremely high. It's not difficult foil to ride at all in any conditions. With regard to glide, it is certainly more than adequate, but if you are looking for a foil with a very shallow glide angle, then this isn't the one in the North range for that, and you should be looking at the HA foils. I was not at all disappointed with the glide. It was really exactly what I expected of a medium aspect foil, and on par with the Axis HPS foils I usually ride. For pumping, the 700 fuselage was definitely a barrier to a reactive pump. If you want to pump this foil, I would recommend dropping down to the 600 fuselage. The S270 tail was also quite stiff to pump. I had better success with both the S208 and the S185, as they were smaller and easier to activate. I certainly could pump the foil and make progress, but it is quite a stiff and shallow pump due to the longer fuselage. For jumping, the foil was not particularly explosive like some more freestyle orientated foils. It relied more on speed and a fairly aggressive launch angle rather than being a foil that generates huge pop when you come to jump it. I got some good jumps on it and overall found it similar to jumping an Axis HPS foil. For surfing waves, it was very well behaved on the drop-in, with no surging or swooping on the initial steep section of the wave. It carried quite well on wind-blown swell and was easy and forgiving to manoeuvre on the wave. I never ever felt close to breaching due to overspeeding or too much front foot pressure. It is just a very controlled, easy to use foil. In terms of overall handling, for things like 360s and all of your various advanced jibes and tacks, this is where it performs really very nicely, as the usability of this foil is so forgiving. I had a huge amount of fun doing tacks, jibes, 360s and backwinding, and it really excels at this type of freeride sailing. Overall, I was very happy with the MA 1050 V2, and I would have no complaints at all if I had to change tomorrow to this foil. It is similar to an Axis HPS foil in a lot of respects, but without any of the annoying downsides of the HPS foil, those being poor breach, poor tip ventilation and swooping or surging when dropping onto waves. The MA 1050 V2 is really a much improved Axis HPS, and for that I really enjoyed using it. I did additionally have the option to try some different stabilizers. First, the S208, which unlocks some more speed without any reduction in usability. I actually felt like the S178 might have suited me better, as the S208 was still a very stable tail and I could probably easily have handled something a bit faster and looser. The S185 had almost identical speed to the S208, but with better manoeuvrability. The S185 also loosened off the yaw axis a little. The surf tails are certainly more playful without sacrificing any speed. However, you just want to go fast, then the S208 has a better stability at speed and still has good turning characteristics. Now, I did have the option, due to one of my colleagues on the beach allowing me to borrow an MA850 V2 and an HA850 as well. So if we come on to the MA850 V2, this was immense fun. I had a great time on this foil and I found the 850 was actually a much better match for me than the 1050. It's just the 1050 but on steroids, faster, more playful, and just a huge bundle of fun with the same high usability factor. The 850 is definitely not a foil to be scared of, but you will need a bit more speed to get it onto foil. Not a huge amount, but it is noticeable. On the same day I rode the HA850. This definitely unlocks that lovely glide that you get from an HA foil, but it was significantly harder to get onto foil and needed quite a bit more speed than the MA850. It was also a much higher span foil than the MA850, and you could feel it picking up the lift in the chop, and it kind of felt like a spanny foil to ride, which is not my favourite type of foil to ride in choppy conditions, which is usually what we get at me on shore. The HA850 was not particularly faster than the MA850 either. I found I needed to manage it more at speed, whereas the MA850 I could just lean on it as hard as I liked and it would just take it without creating more management for me through the chop. As a summary, the MA1050 V2 is probably an intermediate foil, as is the MA850 V2, and they're a bundle of fun with nice performance and high usability factor. It's such a forgiving foil that I feel a beginner could happily use the larger sizes to learn with and then move down to the smaller sizes as their skill grows. The HA850 I thought was a little more technical to manage, but it still turned really well and had a better glide, but it required more wind or board speed to get onto foil. The HA I would definitely pigeonhole for intermediates and above. It's not that it is hard to ride, but more that it is more difficult to get onto foil and has a more aggressive stall, which some people may find off-putting. I liked all three tails, the S270, S208 and the S185, although realistically for me I would only ever use the S208 or S185, as the S270 was just too beginner orientated and a little too stable and stiff for me. If we come on to pros and cons, the pros for the MA V2 are high usability, great breech control and tip ventilation control, good speed, nice low end, excellent build quality, and overall a really confidence inspiring and fun foil. The cons, and I really struggled to come up with cons for this foil, are the painted design on the wingtips and the lack of slots for the mast bolts, because it does make it a little more fiddly to get your mast onto the board when you have to go through holes rather than using slots. So lastly, would I recommend this foil system? And I think it's probably obvious that the answer to that is absolutely 100%. There's very little I found to be an issue, and its price for performance is absolutely exceptional. I really enjoyed using the North system, and if it was in the car I would usually pick it over using my Axis foils, as it was just such an easy to use foil system with really good overall performance. Well done to North, this is a really accomplished foil system. My thanks to the Water Sports Centre for allowing me to demo the MA1050 V2, And also thanks to Kevin, who I sail with at me on shore, who very kindly lent me his MA850 and his HA850 so I could round out this review with a bit more information about the North foils. I'll include links in the description for the Water Sports Centre should you wish to show them some appreciation, and I'll see you on the next video.